Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Herschel Talkers. We're coming into Week 12. Georgia coming off a great win over Auburn, 27-10. It's always good to put the beat down on the Gus bus. Georgia has now won 11 of 14 in the series. So pretty much we're Auburn's daddy, which is great. But DeAndre Swift looked great, getting 186 yards. Had some struggles on the goal line. But great atmosphere, being a night game, getting the win. Moving on next, we got UMass this week. I've seen point spreads up around 44, so this should be one get in, get out, get the starters out by halftime. See a lot of Justin Fields and the backups should just stay healthy. And then rolling in, playing the Nerds, Georgia Tech next week. And then we'll get ready for the big showdown, Georgia against Alabama, coming up in early December. As hopefully we can match up with him really well. Not sure about the whole Tua situation, but to me he looks hurt, but I'm no doctor. But that should be a great matchup coming up. Please follow us on social media, YouTube channel, subscribe, and give us some likes, give us some comments. We're also on post on Facebook. We're also posting on Twitter. Might even try to get on iTunes. We're working on that, trying to branch out a little bit. But please follow us on that. And I'm going to give Trey's Dawg of the Week. It's going to go with Syracuse plus 10 against number 3 Notre Dame. Didn't get to do one last week because we took a week off. But I like number 13 Syracuse plus 10, keeping it close. Closer than the experts think against number 3 Notre Dame. Got a great conversation coming up with former Florida Gator wide receiver, all-time touchdown reception leader there. I didn't know until he told me. Chris Doering, who is currently on the SEC Network analyst. You see him on there on the weekends. Doing a great job on that. He was a journeyman in the NFL, played for several teams. He played for Jacksonville Jags, Indianapolis Colts, Cincinnati Bengals, Denver Broncos, Washington Redskins, Pittsburgh Steelers, Houston Texans. Enjoy the great conversation with former Florida Gator Chris Doering, and now SEC analyst. Yeah, we got a special guest, Chris Doering, here on the Herschel Talker podcast. A little late night session here, but former Florida Gator and also SEC network analyst. Chris Doering, welcome. Even though he is a Gator, we're glad to have you doing today, Chris.
Am I the first Gator on this podcast?
Yes, you are. We usually have we've had some former Georgia players, Sean Bailey, we had Greg Blue. I also had Uncle Lou, who's the big Georgia guy on YouTube. If you ever look him up, he's really hilarious. He's got a big following. But yeah, first Gator.
Well, I'm honored, man. I appreciate you having me, brother.
No problem. Yeah, I was looking at your Wikipedia. I know you played from 1991 to 95 with the Florida Gators. You were a walk-on. I actually played 1 year back in 2001 for Georgia Southern. So, what was the whole process, and how'd you get going on the walk-on side?
Man, I mean, it was a situation where I grew up in Gainesville. I was a lifelong Gator fan. In fact, my childhood was tormented by memories of Buck Bellew to Lindsey Scott and Herschel Walker running all over us. So when I got to Florida and got a chance to kind of turn the tide on the Dogs, that was one of my highlights of my career there. But I grew up a Gator, wanting to play for the Gators one day. That was my dream. And despite having a great high school career, just never got a scholarship offer from the Gators. Never got any scholarship offers from anywhere, in fact, which I think in the end was a blessing, because had I gotten a scholarship offer somewhere else, I probably would have taken it. But Coach Spurrier did offer me a preferred walk-on spot, and I decided to go that route. I decided to prove people wrong. Everybody told me I wasn't big enough or fast enough or good enough to play at the major college football level. I was intent on proving them wrong, and so I think things work out the way they're supposed to. I think because I always felt like I had to prove everybody wrong, I had a chip on my shoulder. And even after I was given a scholarship before my sophomore season, it never really was enough. I constantly was pushing harder just to kind of, make it seem like I did belong. That was validation for me, ultimately getting that scholarship. But two, knowing how much it took to get the scholarship and not ever wanting to let that get taken away or anybody beat me out. And so I think it was a sense of motivation that was was developed because of my walking on, not only at Florida but in the NFL as well.
Oh, that's a great story. I didn't realize that. Yeah, that you kind of persevered and went against the odds. Yeah, I always thought the walk on stories are great. Like for example, Baker Mayfield being a walk on, and
Mm-hmm.
he's had great success. So yeah, that's an awesome story.
Yeah.
And how was it being under Steve Spurrier? Because I know he can be definitely hard to play for. And for example, maybe you can go into. I remember back in the '90s, I was really young then, but I remember Terry Dean was doing really well, and
Yeah.
then he struggled. I remember he had 21 touchdowns, 4 picks or something like that, and then he had a really bad game and he got pulled, and then Danny Werfel took over for then. I just know
Yeah.
he'd always he's one of those not to make the change for the betterment of the team.
Well, I think I'll address your second point there first, and then come back to your other question after that. But I think Coach Spurrier was the guy that treated the quarterback position just like every position. If you're not playing well, if there's another guy that can give the team an opportunity to win, he's going to put that player in. And I think there's this thought amongst coaches that that quarterbacks need to be handled with kid gloves, and that they have to be treated special, and that they, their fragile mentality is something you got to keep an eye on. And Coach Spurrier believed that, just like everybody else, he was big on John Wooden, and he quoted John Wooden quite a bit. And I remember he talked about one Woodenism, as he said, the coach's greatest ally is the bench, and not being afraid to put somebody else in there is going to ultimately make everybody at that position, everybody on your team, better. And so I really always appreciated the way that he approached that. Now, in terms of playing for Coach Spurrier, you asked if it was difficult. It wasn't difficult in that he expected a lot. He expected you to play the way you were coached. And that's really the reason why I was able to not only play at Florida, get a scholarship, but to excel the way that I did, because, I was very attention to detail oriented. I did the things that he asked me to do. I did the things that were expected in that offense, and he knew he could trust me. And so I don't think there's ever an issue with a coach that, one, communicates what he expects from you, and two, holds you to that level of expectation. And, I think that in this day and age where everybody, kids coming out feel entitled, like coaches owe them something, I think it was a refreshing way to kind of grow up, and a refreshing way for me to learn how to be a good football player. And that carried over to my time with him in the NFL when I played for him with the Washington Redskins. A lot of guys on that Redskin team didn't know how to take Coach Spurrier. They didn't understand, his sarcasm, and didn't understand the way he communicated. But for me, outside of my parents, he's probably the most influential person in my entire life that's, helped create not only the player that I was, and the player that I became, and the stuff I do on TV for the SEC Network and on Sirius XM, but also the type of father I am, the type of business person I am, and the person I am in general. So I'm very grateful for my time with him, and the impact that he had on my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like being a Georgia fan, never really liked Spurrier, but I always respected him, and I know he dominated his 10-1. But yeah, definitely one of the great minds on the offensive side, and he's a great with quarterback. So yeah, just respected him.
Yeah, not to interrupt you, but I think whether you liked him or you didn't like him, I think you respected him, and I think people were always intrigued by him, and everybody always wanted to ask me what it was like to play for him or hear Spurrier stories. And the fact that he came into the SEC in 1990 when everybody in the conference was pretty much running the football and being very conservative, he went 4 and 5 wide receivers. He started airing the football out, and everybody else had to change what they were doing from an offensive scheme standpoint just to be able to keep up, because we were scoring 50 points a game. And so looking at Auburn and Georgia and these traditional run-heavy teams be converted into 4 and 5 wide receiver type teams as well. It just spoke to the impact that he had on the conference and the college football landscape as a whole.
Yeah. And that's awesome. Yeah, and he's also great on the mic. All of his Spurrier great quotes, and how he kind of take jabs. Everybody was always great.
Yeah.
And he did dominate Georgia. So I should probably you did play. Was it all 4 years in Jackson? Did you get to play in Jacksonville all 4
No,
years?
man, I'm one of the few people that can say that they played Georgia in Jacksonville, in Gainesville, and in Athens. And
Okay.
while I grew up going to a lot of the games over there in Jacksonville, it was a real pleasure for me to get the opportunity to have Georgia come to Gainesville and then to go to Athens. Playing between the hedges is one of those special things that you always hear about.
All right.
And obviously, I had never been to a game there before and never played there. So to go there and not only get a chance to play, but put 50 plus points on the Bulldogs, something that hadn't been done to that point in time, was special to me. And
Right.
I caught 3 touchdowns that day. I actually caught 5 touchdowns, 3 on the same drive. 2 of them got called back because of penalties,
Wow.
and all in the first half. So it was a kind of a record day for us in general. One that was for me kind of a lifelong dream, and paying back Georgia for all those bad memories I had as a kid. And on
Right.
my way out, I got a chance to take a piece of the hedges with me that I still have that are very special to me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know I was really young, but I do remember that. So yeah, we took some butt whippings in those. Were you did you get to play? And I know that was right around the time the questionable call, like was it timeout on the Eric Zaire
Yeah,
touchdown?
yeah.
Was that
So that was '93. That was my
okay?
sophomore season, and interestingly enough, the game plan going in that day was that we were gonna throw a lot of the routes that would come to me. I was expecting to have a big day against Georgia's defense that played a lot of cover 2. So
Right.
I was going to be operating in the little cover 2 zone area, the middle of the field, and the corner routes and stuff. And a couple hours before the game, the skies got dark and it rained as hard as I've ever seen it rain at a football game before. And so we went, primarily run oriented on the ground offensively. Eric Redd had a huge day, had a bunch of carries.
Right.
But it didn't seem to affect Eric Zaire. He threw 63 times in the rain, and they very nearly
Well,
beat us. We got a timeout as they were going in, close down in the end zone, and prevented them from having a touchdown that counted. Ultimately, we fortunately won that football game. But I was always impressed with the way that Eric Zaire threw the football and the way those guys caught the ball in that terrible weather.
oh yeah. And I know they've been talking about possibly. I think the series renews in 2021. Are you big on maybe them taking it back to home and home, or do you like where
No,
it is? Or
no, I'm big on Jacksonville. I mean,
all right,
it's a very special environment. And I know Georgia fans sometimes don't like the fact that it's played in Jacksonville and say that there's maybe an advantage for Florida not having to get on the plane. But I
right,
do think there's something special about, I remember as a player coming over that bridge. We'd stay over in Ponte Vedra. We'd come across the river, and you just see half the place orange and blue and half the place red and black, and the way
oh
that
yeah,
the visually looks in the stands, and just the fact that there's a Hall of Fame devoted just to one game speaks to how special that rivalry is. And I
yeah,
think it belongs in Jacksonville. And as much as I enjoyed getting to do the home and home thing, I think it should be there going forward in Jacksonville.
oh yeah. It's definitely a great environment. We've been with some buddies, I think 5 times since 2011. We're supposed to go this past year, but our most recent one, our buddy, he had to fly out to Norway, so we all just kind of watched it at home. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's definitely great environment. We stayed at Amelia Island. It's great to
Yeah, that
switch it up
seems
a little
like
bit.
quite the party for the Georgia folks up there. I've heard a lot about that, man.
Oh
I'll have
yeah,
to check that out one day.
it is. The landing. We're getting a little older for the landing. We've kind of been there, done that. But yeah, Amelia Island is really cool. It's kind of like a mini like Savannah or Charleston. So
Well, the best part about it back when I was playing, if we won, we were allowed to stay in Jacksonville. So my freshman and sophomore seasons, we obviously won during that run that we had, and got to go out after the game, and we go to the landing as the kings of the landing. Man, it was kind of a fun time. They'd never let players do that nowadays, but back then that was acceptable, and we certainly took advantage of it.
that's awesome. Yeah, I know you played a little bit in NFL. What was your what was maybe your favorite year, favorite team you played for, or you preferred?
Yeah, my NFL career was much like my the beginnings of my college career. I was an All-American at the University of Florida. Still hold the record for career touchdown receptions.
Oh,
Mel Kiper had me going in the 3rd or 4th round, and unfortunately I didn't end up going until the 6th round. Got drafted by Jacksonville, and it was miserable going from Coach Spurrier to Tom Coughlin, and couldn't have been two opposite ends of the spectrum. I couldn't wait to get out of there. I was cut in the preseason, ended up going to Indianapolis, spent 2 years in Indianapolis. The next year, our coach got fired, and so they let me go, and I got picked up by the Bengals, played for the Bengals for part of that season, played for the Broncos for the next 2 seasons, tore my Achilles tendon in 2000, so I was out of the league for the 2001 season, and then Coach Spurrier decided to go to the NFL, so 2002 he took me to the Redskins, and then spent my final couple seasons in the NFL with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and my most productive years probably came in the latter half after my injury. Coach Spurrier kind of revitalized my career, had a good season there, and then had another good season the next year with the Steelers. So, I look at the NFL as it's much more of a business. It doesn't quite have that same college feel. Although, you look at the NFL fan bases, there's probably 5 or 6 that are really, really good. Green Bay's awesome. Kansas City's awesome. But Denver, Washington, and Pittsburgh are all right there among the best. And so I had a chance to play in those environments, which was really cool. And as much as I moved around from the time I finished at Florida to the time I retired from the NFL, I moved over that 10-year period. I moved 22 different times. And so it was a very unsettled life. But it was one that, I think, provided some blessings for me in that I got to play for a bunch of really good coaches and Bill Cowher, Mike Shanahan, Lindy Infante, Coach Spurrier again. I mean, there were really good influences on my football mind and experience. And then, I got the chance to play with so many different guys and live in different parts of the country. And so, I think just in general, as you get older, you have a greater appreciation for it. I think when you're in the moment, you don't realize how good you have it. But looking back at getting to do all that I did and have a career that was as long as mine was, even though it wasn't as maybe statistically successful or monetarily successful, to be able to do something you love for a 10-year period of time, when the average career is like 3.5 years in the NFL, it was really special for me.
I kind of have some different experience for different teams. I always wanted this since, some guys bounce around. Do you guys just get like 1-year apartments, or how does that work when you guys live during the year?
I bought a house in Denver, which was the only place I ever bought a house. But the rest of the time it was pretty. My wife and my family would come up there, and then we'd go home back to Gainesville after the season. So, I probably, in hindsight, I wish I would have had a little bit more stability in one place and had the ability to settle and grow some roots there. But I don't really have any regrets looking back on it as a career.
Right. That's interesting. I always wondered about that. Yeah, no. Wanted to transition into Georgia had another big win this week, 27-10 over Auburn in the Gus Bus. They've actually won 11 of 14. I was reading some funny tweets today that they were saying, Georgia is now Auburn's daddy, and they've had all these statistics, haven't scored, in the second half since like 2005 or 2009 or something. So, just want to get your thoughts on Georgia going forward. DeAndre Swift had a big game. I think it was 186 yards. And basically the big question is, do they have a shot against Alabama going forward in the SEC championship game? Early point spread from Vegas I've been seeing is, 13.5 or 14. So, just get your thoughts if we got a chance.
Yeah, I think, first off, it's nice to see DeAndre Swift back and healthy. When the offense was struggling a little bit early in the year, it primarily had to do with him being injured and being on a pitch count, so to speak, where he was limited in what he was asked to do and the number of snaps he was taking. But it's, he's just such a dynamic running back that can, put his foot in the ground and get upfield on you and explode into the secondary. He can catch balls out of the backfield. You can move him around and line up as a wide receiver. So when you're losing Chubb and Michelle, I was under the impression, as good as those guys were and as much production as they had, having a guy like DeAndre Swift that can do everything he could do would really, kind of be able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak. And so when they didn't have him healthy, I think that limited the offense and what they were able to do. Obviously, the offensive line being injured has been a little bit of a roadblock for them. But getting some of those guys back healthy obviously is big. Ben Cleveland coming back and getting healthy will be huge. But I think, where I'm looking at them really still trying to grow is defensively. And when you lose, the players they did from last year, particularly in the middle of that defense, John Atkins and Roquan Smith, it's going to take time. It's going to take some growing pains, but you're really never going to be able to replace a guy like Roquan Smith as the eraser on that defense, a guy that could to play sideline to sideline as well as he could, and the way that Atkins was able to eat up blockers on the offensive line and keep him off their linebackers, it's just tough to replace players like that. So the defense has taken a little bit of a step back. I do worry a little bit about what I've seen of late in their goal to go situations. They struggled in that goal line stop by Florida a couple weeks ago. They struggled again, multiple possessions against Auburn. So I want to see them be a little more consistent in that part of the field and punch it in a little bit more. But at the end of the day, this is a Georgia team that's getting better and better. There's a bunch of young talent on it, and the more reps they get, the better they're going to get. So as we get closer to that first weekend in December, they're no longer rookies, so to speak. Those guys are veteran players, and they're going to have to step up and play a really talented Alabama team. I think the interesting thing for them is can they protect a little bit better, and how healthy is Tua Tagovailoa going to be? Because every game it seems like we're listening to Nick Saban after the game talk about Tua's injury and that he could have gone back in if they needed him. Well, at some point in time, they're going to need him for 4 quarters, and it very well may be in Atlanta against Georgia. And hopefully he's at full strength, because I want to see a battle of those 2 best teams in our conference at full strength. And it was a great game last year in the national championship game, and I expect another great one in the SEC championship game.
Yeah, and speaking of the goal line defense or goal line offensive problems, so you being wide receiver, and I know you have a lot of offense. What do you think Georgia maybe should do differently? I mean, they're getting over 300 yards, inside the in between the 20s and 10. Do you think? I think there was in the Florida game they ran everything to the left side from the stat sheet. It's like, do they need to do more toss sweeps, switch it up a little bit? I know they tried to put Fields in the game. It's just like they break down there.
Well, I mean, I think some of it has to do with the offensive line. Again, getting healthy will help them in that area of the field. I'm not a big fan of bunching up and running the ball right up the middle time and time again. I mean, I think you got to be a little more creative. And it's one thing to have confidence in your offensive line and be able to feel like they can get you 1 yard or less at that part of the field. It's almost a test of your toughness, so to speak, to be able to do that and impose your will on defense. But if it's not working, I do like some outside runs. I like some sweeps. I like using Swift on the edge with his speed. I like some play action down there too. I'm a guy that loves to get the quarterback on the edge with a little bootleg and create a little run pass kind of option out there too. So those are some of the things that I like to do as a receiver. I was always happy when we were in goal to go situations down around the 1 or 2. When we try to run and get stuffed or take a sack and go back to the 3 or 4 yard line, because then I knew Coach Spurrier was going to go 5 wides and we were going to throw the football down there. So I like spreading it out and using some of those big targets that Georgia has and creating some matchups down there in that part of the field as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, and back to the Tua thing, do you think like maybe he's more injured than they're letting on, and he just the only reason why is it was a Georgia orthopedic has been watching the games, and he came out on one of the forums and mentioned that that's not a normal brace what the kid's got, and he's just saying from his opinion that most he's done a lot of knee surgeries of that might be like a torn ACL MCL type brace that he's wearing, and he's just trying to push through. And do you think he's more injured than he is? Because I got a feeling Auburn's going to play him. That's going to be a rivalry game. He might take some extra shots. I know a lot of the fans are saying there were some dirty shots by Mississippi State. I don't want to see anybody get hurt, but it's just, I don't know. I think he might be a liability. I mean, I'd sit him this week against the Citadel. I know Jalen Hurts is injured. Maybe go with the third-string quarterback kid. But I don't know. I kind of, I don't want it to be one of those if we did beat him, Tua was injured. I kind of would want him full strength,
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I think Georgia wants to face the best. I mean, I think they want to be able to say that they were able to beat Alabama at their full strength. So, I don't want to speak to his injury. That would be me just guessing, and I don't know enough about it to be able to speak knowledgeably. But
Yeah.
I agree with you in that I don't think I would play him against
Mm-hmm.
the Citadel, because even if Jalen Hurts can't go, Mac Jones, has shown some promise against in the spring game. It didn't look great against Mississippi State on Saturday, but against the Citadel, you should be able to have your way, and you should at least be able to run the football. That's the thing about Alabama right now, is they're rounding into form defensively. And in the beginning of the year, it was all about their offense. It was all about their passing game. Let's not forget these guys. They got 3 really good running backs, an offensive line that's extremely talented, and now a defense that hasn't allowed a point, I think, in 10 quarters. So they got a lot of ways that they can beat you. And if getting a week of rest will help Tua for the stretch run, I'd have him on the bench.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I noticed early in the year. I was like, well, Bama's a little step back on, their defense, giving up like 31 to Arkansas. But yeah, those last 2 games, giving up,
they locked it in. Yeah, I mean, think about it. They lost their top 6 players in the secondary. Their linebackers were still really young. If you went back and looked at that Arkansas tape, there were a lot of busts in coverage, particularly, because of those linebackers. So I think they've shored things up a little bit. Alabama's defense and the way that Nick Saban teaches it, it's so intricate and complicated. He's not going to dumb it down for those guys. He expects those guys to raise their level. And so with more experience and more reps, they've gotten more comfortable in it and what they do. So it's a defense that seems like they're playing at a high level right now. Quinnen Williams is an absolute monster. And, I expect them to become that. They already become the Alabama defense that we typically expect, but they're just going to get better and better as those guys in the secondary get more reps as well.
Oh yeah, completely agree with that. Yeah, I know you're a Florida guy, and I know they got Dan Mullen, first year coach this year. What do you think about Florida? I think they're headed in the right direction. I know they're 7-3, had a little scare against South Carolina this past week, but just want to get your thoughts on first year with Dan Mullen.
Before the season, I expected Florida to be an 8-4 team.
Right.
It looks like they're going to end up, hopefully 9-3, which is a big jump from where they were at 4-7 last year. Maybe not the route that I expected them to take in getting to that, losing at home to Kentucky, losing at home to Missouri. But at the end of the day, I'm encouraged by the future of the program. I mean, Dan Mullen has clearly made an impact in his first year. He's a guy that I thought, the coaching that he in terms of scheme and play call against Mississippi State to offset the advantage that Mississippi State's defense had on the defensive line over Florida's offensive line was huge. Those games, winning at Tennessee, winning at Starkville, going on the road, winning at Vanderbilt, really impressed me with what they were able to accomplish. And you saw it against Georgia. Florida's secondary is incredibly thin. Losing Marco Wilson early in the season is hurt. They had a bunch of guys out early in the year, as the year's gone on. So they've had to play a little shorthanded, but they're just going to get better and better. And I'm excited to see how Emory Jones, the first quarterback recruit that Dan Mullen's coaching staff signed, I'm anxious to see him kind of progress. I'm of the opinion that we get to see him a lot this week against Idaho. I know other people have disagreed with me vehemently on Twitter, have been in some disagreements with some folks on there, but at the end of the day, I think Emory Jones plays a lot against Idaho, and they use him in the bowl game, and he redshirts for next season.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So is Felipe, is he a junior next year, or is he a senior?
Yeah, he's a redshirt sophomore this year, so he's got a couple more seasons, and it's amazing. He's got all the skills, man. 6'6", athletic, big arm.
Got a gun on him,
yeah. You see the throw he made against Georgia in that first drive of the second half, and you're like, wow, man,
it was a laser.
Why doesn't he do that every time? But still having a hard time processing what he's seeing defensively and making the right reads and not forcing it into coverage. So he's gotten better. I'm impressed with what he's done to this point in time. There's still a lot of room for improvement, but I think, like we said, he's a sophomore and he's got 2 more years of eligibility. So we'll see how that progresses.
So you think he'll be the man going forward?
I don't know about that. I mean, ideally, I've heard a lot of good things about the future of Emory Jones. I saw him in the spring and saw him in fall camp. he's a young guy. I mean, he was supposed to still be in high school when he was out there competing in spring practice. So time will tell. Dan Mullen has a history of not putting young QBs in before they're ready, and I think that's kind of what he's doing with Emory Jones as well.
Right. Yeah, I think similar with Justin Fields. I think I know after the LSU game, everybody's wanting Justin Fields, but I think it showed the last couple of weeks that Kirby Smart made the right decision. He's not quite there yet. After he stares down the first target, and then after that he pulls it down, and then he took that bad sack. So I think he's definitely a great player going forward, just not quite ready. And maybe there'll be a battle in the offseason.
What are we doing with these kids? I mean, the fact that we expect them to come in and play and be perfect right away as 18-year-old freshmen, it's just unrealistic. And you know what it does? It further speaks to how good Jake Fromm was last year. The fact that he could come in as a true freshman, take over that team that was filled with veterans and become a leader in his own right and make big plays down the stretch. I mean, that final drive in regulation against Oklahoma, I remember watching that from the sideline of that game thinking, wow, man, I can't believe the maturity and the experience it looks like he's had playing in these situations, and yet he's an 18-year-old kid at that point or whatever. So he's really impressed me with what he's done. I know he had a bad game against LSU, but he's the guy that gives Georgia the best chance to win. And let's bring Justin Fields along slowly and understand that's going to take some time. He's not going to be perfect.
Exactly. I think everybody he's like, yeah, Tua could do it last year, and they're thinking he could do something like that. But I think just Tua was a special player. Yeah, and I want to get your thoughts on what do you think happened to. I was just real surprised about Kentucky getting blown out by Tennessee. You think Kentucky ran out of gas? You think Georgia took the life out of them? What do you think happened to them?
A little bit of that. I mean, obviously there was some disappointment and trying to bounce back after a big game that you emotionally invested so much of your energy into. I think it also, had a lot to do with, they look like they're running out of gas a little bit at this point in the year. But I really believe the majority of it is because they're so one-dimensional and they're limited in what they can do pushing the ball down the field in the passing game. You saw the game plan early in the season. You saw them be able to teams start. Texas A&M stack the box. They were able to stop the run, and they weren't able to do anything in the passing game. You look at Vanderbilt was able to stifle them considerably, and they still somehow found a way to win the game. I think the thing that you saw against Georgia was Georgia be able to dominate them up front and become more physical and stop the run that way, and they can't beat them throwing the football. Even though Terry Wilson's numbers have looked better, those are all short throws that aren't going to really strike fear in the defense. So until you're able to stretch the field, it's going to be tough sledding for Benny Snell and A.J. Rose running the football.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think they're still going to end up with a great year. I think they got Middle Tennessee State and Louisville, which they're god-awful. But should have went 9-3 and should be a decent bowl for them. So that's still a great year, on Kentucky terms.
This is a tremendous year. I mean, I had them winning 8 games in the beginning of the season.
Right.
They've exceeded even those expectations. I mean, if you look back, they were a team that Vegas set their win total at 5.5 games, and they had that beat in like the first 6 weeks of the season or so. So, they have been really impressive to me. There's a bunch of experienced talent on that team, both sides of the ball. They're going to lose an awful lot of it, so I'm anxious to see how they're able to replace it. But Mark Stoops has done a tremendous job there, and if not for the job that Ed Orgeron has done, I think you'd be looking at Mark Stoops as the SEC Coach of the Year.
Oh yeah, completely agree. Another one is, somebody's mentioned today, funny that, you got to maybe give Jeremy Pruitt, if they end up, 6-6, 7-5, some votes, just turning that train wreck around,
It was a train wreck in so many different ways. I mean, they were under talented on both sides of the ball, but I thought the biggest impact is the change in culture. He brought accountability. He brought discipline. And those guys have bought in. To their credit, they've bought in. I remember back to that Georgia game, they weren't really ever threatening to win the game, but they hung in there. Their defense played hard. They pressured Jake Fromm.
Yep, effort was there.
Yeah, since that point in time, they've gone out. They won at Auburn. They beat a top 20 Kentucky team. So this is a year that Tennessee has really made some strides, much more than what I expected in year one. And to get to a bowl game would be a huge accomplishment for Jeremy Pruitt. He's owed a big time tip of the cap for his first season in Knoxville.
I completely agree. I think I had them like 4-8, 5-7. But
Yeah,
I've been shocked with these last couple of wins, especially
yeah.
last week. Yeah. And lastly, I'll get your thoughts. My top four is similar to the top four they have, and I guess I'll play like what if. So I'm sure the popular question is: so you got Bama 1, Clemson 2, Notre Dame 3, Michigan 4, Georgia 5. Let's say Clemson wins out, Notre Dame wins out, Michigan beats Ohio State, and somehow Georgia upsets Bama. From your picks, do you still think Bama stays in, or do they get knocked out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to.
And us, I'm playing what if, but
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. I mean, I really think it's hard to look at it and not with the eye test say Alabama's one of the best teams in the entire country, even though they may have lost to Georgia.
right.
They are they just passed the eye test, man. And so if they let's it's going to be hard to leave out Michigan. I mean, it's hard to leave out. You can't leave out an undefeated Notre Dame as much as I'd like to, because I think they get beat by 50 by Alabama.
Right.
But if everything else stayed status quo, I think they deserve to be in. But I'm not so sure that the committee would see it that way, given the fact that you'd have a couple conference champions, and you'd have a team that has been there so often that there may be, whether you want to admit it or not, there may be some sort of bias and backlash against Alabama.
And do you think, let's say similar is Ohio State didn't get in last year and Alabama got in, so that'd be 2 straight years SEC team got in, maybe that shouldn't have? Or
if Ohio State wins, if let's say Georgia wins and Ohio State wins,
right.
I think Alabama gets in over Ohio State, only because that loss at Purdue to an unranked team that they were beaten handily would be much different than Alabama losing to a top 4 Georgia team. And so I can see where that would be explainable, to leave out the Big Ten champ in that scenario. But with Michigan, if it were Michigan that had won with one loss, I don't think there's any way you can leave them out.
All right, how about this? Let's say everything goes off the rails. Let's say Syracuse, which very could, I think it's 9-point spread. Let's say Syracuse knocks off Notre Dame. What do you think? Who do you think that opens up a team for, or what team to come in?
Yeah, well, I still think, and let's be honest, we're all cheering for Syracuse hard on this weekend. So,
right.
I would love to say, I'd love to see the SEC get 2 teams in again, and the only way that happens is with Georgia winning in Atlanta and Alabama, being close in that game and getting in that way. But I don't know, man. I think there's a lot of wild cards left. Washington State, I mean, they've been impressive. A lot of people probably in the East haven't watched Washington State play much, but I'm impressed with what they've been able to do and going on the road. Mike Leach had never won in Boulder, and they were able to do that. So, I mean, golly, it's interesting because it's been so status quo, and I have a feeling it's going to finish up status quo with all the favorites winning and make it fairly easy on the committee. But if one of those top teams gets left out, it's going to be interesting to see how they decide who's more deserving over the rest of those one-loss teams.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'd like a little craziness, but this looks pretty status quo, like you said. But maybe the Orangemen, even though from a Georgia fan, I think Notre Dame winning out actually might keep, if you have a chance of keeping Alabama out, but you never know. I can see Saban getting on a soapbox and campaigning,
Yeah. But here's the thing for me, man. I always say Florida guy, but I'm an SEC guy too. I've grown up. I think that's the great thing about our conference, and we can dislike each other quite a bit, but when we go outside of the conference, that SEC chant during bowl season is it means a lot. It's different, and so. For me, I loved being in the Rose Bowl. I was standing next to Matt Stinchcomb, cheering for Georgia as if they were Florida. And probably seems a little weird to some Gator fans maybe, but I'm a big fan of this conference. I love getting to do what I do for the SEC Network, and it means a lot to me to see these teams do well. And I take great pride in the bragging rights that having Georgia and Alabama play one another in the national championship allows us as a conference. So it's something I'd love to see again. I don't know if it'll happen again this season, but we can always hope.
Oh yeah, completely agree. And guess who you got maybe on the Heisman Trophy? Who's your pick for that, or who you think's the front runner?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Tua still.
Yeah.
A lot of folks believe that Kyler Murray may have closed some ground. He's been impressive, but I think you got to take into consideration some of the defenses or lack thereof of defense that's played in the Big 12. No disrespect to what Kyler Murray does, but Tua is very impressive with what he does with his accuracy and the way that he puts his ball right on guys and allows them to make yards after the catch. It's been a big key in this offensive explosion this year. So I'm still on the Tua train, although I would admit that probably some ground has been made up by Kyler Murray.
Yeah, I think he could be one of the only ones to ever, I guess, not finish a game or play through a complete game and win the Heisman, which would be impressive.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is because of the success that he has in the first three quarters. And so you can't hold his success against him for not, playing into a fourth quarter. If he's able to do his work early and get done, good for you. So I think that's actually more of a credit to his skill than something you can use against him.
Yeah, just being a Georgia fan, we always get my Alabama comparison. I just don't want it to be one of those. We just need to go ahead and give him the 2018 and 2019 trophy while he's there, and maybe we'll have a shot in 2020. I just hope it's not one of those.
Yeah, I think Kirby's done a great job in building talent and stacking recruiting class after recruiting class on top of one another. He's obviously a tremendous defensive mind, and as those guys get more reps and get older, they're going to get better and better. I made the comment before the season, if anybody within the East was going to make a run at it, this was the year to do it, because Georgia's seemingly going to get better and better after this year. You're not going to catch them losing 8 guys on defense the way you did this year. So I think there's a lot of bright future ahead for Georgia's program for sure.
Exactly. I think he's building the sleeping giants kind of woken up a little bit, but still got saving to deal with every year.
Yeah.
Man. I know it's getting a little late, and appreciate you coming on there. How can we follow you, and what's your what do you? I think you usually work on the weekends.
I'm on Friday nights on SEC Network, and Saturday all day. Me and Dari and Coach Chiswick, during the triple header, and then the rap show at the end of the night. So it's it's a great job. I told you I love getting a chance to do, and I appreciate that. You can catch me on Twitter at Chris Doering. At Chris Doering, and then my Instagram is at cdoring28. So I don't know why I didn't have more consistency there, but those are the social media handles.
Any chance you maybe getting up in the booth? I know DJ Shockley's been doing that. Would you like to do that? Or you kind of like doing the analyst work?
Actually, I used to do the booth.
Did you? Okay.
And then, I did the booth probably for 3 years or so, and then I got an opportunity to go into the studio, and I don't want to leave. I get a chance to talk about every single game, and get a chance to watch them all, which you don't get to do if you're up in the booth doing one game. So I'm very blessed to get to do what I do, and again, I love my team there in Charlotte that I get to go to work with every Friday and Saturday.
That is awesome. All right, Chris, I appreciate you coming on our podcast. Awesome.
Enjoyed it. Thanks for having me, bro.
Okay, thank you. Have a good one.
All right, man.
See you.